Thank you, Monsieur ECHEGARAY. Monsieur Ramirez, la Colombie c'est un pays qui a passé par une situation très difficile, avec des conflits armés, avec tout le narcotrafic, qui a projeté une image très négative pendant des années. Mais à ce moment, ça a changé beaucoup. La Colombie, c'est des pays qui sont des pays qui sont en croissement, mais aussi qui a un centre d'attraction d'investissement et très dynamique. Comment ça s'est passé? Je pense que c'est une histoire très intéressante. On parlait avant ici de Mali, qui est un pays en conflit, mais qui en même temps a beaucoup d'opportunités. Mais aussi, il y a des secteurs critiques qui disent que la croissance dans la Colombie s'est basée dans une industrie très extractive qui va reprimariser l'économie, qui est pas compétitive au niveau industriel. Qu'est-ce que vous croyez? Ça, c'est un débat qui ne se passe seulement dans la Colombie, qui se passe dans la région et que je pense que c'est aussi comparable à la situation en Afrique des fois.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, and I would like also to thank the Amadeus Institute for this invitation. Yesterday, in the last session, I heard an interesting sentence that caught my attention, and it was like a country cannot be enslaved of its history. And in that sense, I would say that Colombia is part of the countries that has seen a dramatic change in history, a dramatic change in its situation, and that it has been a very favorable one. Let me put it in some figures. In 2002, 30% of mayors of the 1,000 or more municipalities that Colombia has couldn't work on their places, in their cities, in their municipalities, because the presence of illegal groups, either guerrillas or paramilitaries or different types of illegal armed groups. At the same time, and there is a list, perhaps you can find it in the internet, a list of what is called the failed states in the world. And even in 2005, I was looking at those rankings. In 2005, Colombia was like in the, I don't know, like 14th place. Perhaps in 2002, I would say we were in the 10 top list of countries that were considered like a failed state. Also, Colombia was, at the end of the last century and the beginning of this, was in its worst fiscal crisis in 100 years. So the situation was really bad, it was terrible. But after 10 years, you can see that there is a presence of the state, police, justice in every municipality. Not that we don't have illegal groups. We have in fact a peace process with the main guerrilla, which is the FARC. But at this time, every mayor, every governor is in its city and its department working and in a safe situation. Macroeconomic stability was achieved. Now the inflation rate went from 22% in the middle 90s to 3% currently. Homicide rates, for example, another important figure, went down from 80 people killed for every 100,000 inhabitants to less than 30 people killed for every 100,000 inhabitants currently. Kidnaps went from 3,000 or more per year to less than 200 per year. And as confidence and security improved, investment ratio as a percentage of GDP went up from more or less 16% in 2002 to 28%, and it has increased every year after year. And currently it's around 28%, near 30%. Of that, an important result, of course, was also poverty. Poverty decreased from 50% in 2002 to 34% in 2011, And the middle income class grew from 16% of total population to more or less 25% of total population. What have been the drivers of this structural transformation? Of course, we have had a good economic times, in the sense a good environment with high prices of commodities, oil, coal, etc. But definitely, we need to have a explicit strategy to recover security through an effective presence of the state in every place of the country. That was an important strategy. The second, I would say, is to improve business environment. Colombia had been like in the list of top 10 reformers in the doing business index of the World Bank in the last years. And for macroeconomic results, I think that we have had an important institution has been to have an independent central bank. It is interesting that many surveys that I have read, the first place in terms of popularity is for the army. The second place is the Catholic Church. And the third place, and that was very, very interesting for me, was the central bank, which is really strange. I mean, in any place of the world, but perhaps more in Latin America. But it was interesting to see that a central bank at the third place of favorability is, I don't know, I call it progress. So it is interesting. Now, the thing is, what's going to happen, what we expect for the next 10 years. There is an interesting report from the Bank of Bilbao, Vizcaya, that they call the Eagles and the Nest, in which, for example, Brazil is in the list of the Eagle countries. Colombia and other, I don't remember, 15 countries or 16 countries are in the Nest list. But the interesting thing is, for example, that in their forecasts, Colombia incremental GDP, I mean, the GDP that is going to be generated in the next 10 years, from 2012 to 2022, more or less will be close to the one that is going to be produced by France, which is around $300 billion. In general, Latin America would contribute with almost 8% of GDP, the incremental GDP of the whole world. And the middle income classes, if we keep on track, if we keep working in that sense, could reach 50% of total population, which means that would be a different country in that sense. But now the thing is, what is the possibility for the country to grow at a rate of 5.5%, 6%? And it's not only for the country, it's also for the region in general. I would say that the main challenge is how to increase productivity growth and to have a more inclusive development or economic growth. First of all, because if you just make like an back of the envelope calculations, you are not going to have a larger increment growth increase due to the labor force or even due to capital increases. Even if the investment ratio in Colombia holds at 30% of GDP, the combination of labor and capital together would contribute, say, to something around 4% to GDP growth. The rest, which is more than 4%, it depends all of productivity. And of course, the question is, how are we going to increase productivity? And I think that's a question for the region in general. Our countries have not been very successful in increasing productivity or to having a growth, a productivity-based growth. But we don't have more. I mean, labor, we are not going to have more than we have had, etc., as I said before. And I just would say at the end that there are, as I see it, 3 key issues that need to be faced. One is how to reduce informality. We have a very large labor and productive informality, and informality is the trap of low productivity and poverty. And how to do that, how to improve formality, to increase formality is one of the issues. The second, that is very related with this thing of being the most unequal region in the world, is the access to tertiary education and to improve the quality of education. I think that we have to recognize, we all in Latin America, that we are doing a very bad job in terms of quality of education. So how to improve that? How to get mainly the poorest people access to this, to technical and technological and education and university is a second challenge. And a third challenge is productive transformation. Joaquin says that we are like mainly in South America, like the powerhouse of China. And there is something that I think that is real. A real challenge is how to escape from the middle income trap. I mean, we have been successful going from 5,000 per capita GDP to 10,000. But then there could be this middle income trap that we need to solve. And I don't think that we are going to be successful if we keep being just the warehouse of China and just the suppliers of minerals and raw materials. We need to have a much more sophisticated, productive structure. And that's something that is common for Chile, for Peru, for Colombia, less in the case of Brazil or Mexico, but it's a real serious problem that we have to address.
Merci. Monsieur Tres. Vous avez parlé qu'il y a on peut voir deux genres de pays dans l'Amérique latine, ceux qui sont en train d'améliorer la situation des puissances émergentes et d'autres qui sont dans une situation plus faible. Mais aussi, on peut trouver des options dans les pays en relation dans son insertion internationale. Il y a des pays qui ont opté pour libéraliser ces économies, pour signer des accords de libre-commerce avec tout le monde, tous les pays du monde. Mais il y a d'autres qui non, qui ont resté plus réticentes à signer d'accords de libre-commerce. Par exemple, le Brésil, on peut parler après. Vous croyez qu'il y a ces deux parties de l'Amérique latine, hein? Donc ces pays qui ont, la plupart, ils sont dans l'arc de l'Atlantique, hein? Et les autres de l'Amérique du Sud avec le Mercosur. Il y a deux stratégies. Est-ce qu'il est possible de maintenir deux stratégies dans l'ère de la globalisation? Ce sont deux options différentes. Ou ça dépend de la structure de l'industrie du même pays qui fait qu'une option est plus favorable que l'autre?
That's an interesting question. Well, I actually deliberately skipped policy diversity when I spoke about diversity within the region. It is true that diversity is not only related to two groupings, one more characterized by market-led development, if I can put it that way, and the other one more like governing the market, if I can use the expression of a successful book of a couple of decades ago. I think that there is a lot of in-betweens, and it's always this difficulty when we talk about regions to see not just the white and the black, but all these gray shades in between. And if we look at growth, it is actually, it doesn't give us clues to what works best, because we would have an economy like Chile, which is very open to trade. It, in fact, has been the champion of free trade agreements in Latin America for over 20 years. It was the first Latin American country to sign free trade agreements with Asian countries. And not only that, but Chile is one of the pioneering countries in what is now called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the initiative now supported by the US. I mean, the seed of that was planted by countries like Chile or Singapore. And they grew dramatically. The poverty reduction was outstanding. Not so much the inequality reduction, but what you saw in Chile was that the tide lifted all boats, and in a way, so those in the higher income bracket did very well, but also in the bottom income bracket did well. So the tide actually lifted all boats where they were, roughly speaking. But at the same time, you look at a country like Argentina, who's had a more you know, governing the market, if I can put it this way, or more a state intervention, that has grown as well. Here the thing is, when you control for tailwinds, and Latin America, Juan Mauricio said it, you know, we've benefited from tailwinds, and actually commodity prices always move in cycles, but this cycle seems to be longer and longer, and we take commodity management not so much as windfall gains, which is what prudent macroeconomic policy tells you, but rather as a permanent gain. And you will see, and we are seeing in some commodity-rich countries in South America, that social mobilization is taking place at a big scale. So here, what I'd like to conclude, because I think we are short of time, but here the jury has not finished yet, but it's not so much what is happening today and what has happened in the last 10 years. It's who is better prepared to face the uncertainties of a global economy in a context of open economies. Because even those who are staging state-led development, like Venezuela, you know, a country like Venezuela exports almost half its oil to the US. And the US is going to be not only self-sufficient, but the first oil-producing country in the world by 2020. So I think it's more about what Juan Mauricio said in the three last challenges that you have mentioned. Those countries that are better equipped will be the ones that have more transparent economic economic policy and more focused and efficient social policies.
Vous voulez faire quelques remarques sur cette question avant de passer la parole au public? Oui? Vous voulez... Do you want to... Non? Donc, il y a des questions? Il y a des questions dans le public? Il y a quelques questions? On continue? Non?
There is somebody in the third row.
Merci. Oui, oui, c'est Bel Arbi de l'industrie automobile. Moi, la question au niveau de l'Amérique, il y a l'accord NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, vous avez le Mercosur, et vous avez des pays qui ont signé des accords comme, vous avez parlé du Chili, qui a été le premier à signer des accords de libre-échange avec l'Europe, avec l'Asie, avec l'Amérique, avec tout le monde, presque tout le monde. Mais c'est un petit pays, ça reste quand même un petit pays, même s'il est très agressif, et qui ont basé l'ensemble de leur développement sur l'éducation au départ et sur une stratégie à long terme. Maintenant, quand on regarde au niveau des pays émergents, c'est le Brésil aujourd'hui qui sort avec le BRIC comme l'exemple régional de développement, surtout les 10 dernières années. Et puis maintenant, on regarde le Brésil comme modèle. Bon, maintenant, si on regarde ce qui se passe au niveau de l'Afrique, parce que là, il y a le Brésil aujourd'hui qui a une politique très agressive au niveau de l'Afrique. Il avait déjà commencé au départ avec la Chine, maintenant avec l'Afrique. Comment voyez-vous ce développement entre les deux parties, entre le côté africain et le côté de l'Amérique du Sud? Merci.
Yeah, there are, as Joaquin mentioned, there are a very diverse. You find a very diverse picture in Latin America. In Brazil, for example, stand out of the crowd, among other reasons, because of his huge domestic market. So it's 200 million people. It's over 120 million that are economically active. So and for the past 45 years, since the late 60s, early 70s, that Brazil aggressively bet on this domestic market, and first by building import substitution, based on an import substitution approach, its own industrial basis at the very basic level, then turning this base more complex to the point that today it's producing aircraft and auto parts and cars, vehicles, etc. So, but the driving force for policy and for corporations has always been the domestic market. And over these past 10 years, in addition to some of the policies that were oriented to reducing poverty and inequality, such as the cash transfer.
Last summer, and there is a new president that took office in early December, Mr. Peña Nieto, that's his name, that returned the traditional political party that had been in power 70 years, and there's been a bracket of 12 years. And there were not many hopes related to that presidency. So, well, it's going to be the old story, and it has been surprising for a number of factors that I think that are relevant for your geopolitical question, let's say, related to Morocco. One, Mexico has the biggest, longest border between the developed and the developing world with the United States. Morocco is a bordering nation with the EU, which is also an extremely large economic grouping, despite the problems. So that's good. I mean, it's economic proximity. And what has happened in Mexico was an overall political agreement that was signed by all the political parties, for a surprise that we had. No single commentator anticipated that, in what is called Agenda for Mexico. And that includes things for the agenda of tomorrow, not what I describe of the last decade or today, but it's the productivity-led growth, and consists of education reform, very serious education reform. In Mexico, teachers, I spent 6 years living in Mexico and working in Mexico. In Mexico, a teacher, when the Mexican teacher retires, gives that position to somebody who he or she likes. So that's going to stop, and you're going to go into teaching through merit, one. That's going to address the quality issues you've just mentioned in your intervention. So education is key for competitiveness. So unless you have an education agenda, you are trapped in the middle income gap of the LICO countries. Second, he's done something unprecedented, which is opening foreign direct investment in the energy sector. That means that foreign investors will be able to invest in the state-controlled oil company, Pemex, that was nationalized from Standard Oil in the 1930s, okay? And the third pillar of this reform, which is also surprising, is the telecommunications and television liberalization. Let's not forget that the wealthiest person in the world, Mr. Carlos Slim, is a Mexican and has made his fortune in the telecom industry in the privatization of telecom. So there is going to be a competition policy, not just in telecom, but in television, also in energy. So doing geopolitical issues, I think Morocco would be very good placed if it did the reforms that drive competitiveness and uses the proximity of a very large market like the EU.
Il faut dire que les réformes qui étaient nécessaires, c'était les prix qui les a bloqués pendant des années. Et maintenant qu'il est au gouvernement, il fait les faire. Mais c'est bien, c'est le chef depuis David quand il va aller. Et bon, il y a d'autres questions?
Yes, Khalid Benamou, I'm director of the Sahrawi project. I have a question relevant to, and I'm maybe jumping the gun on the next session, on large integrative projects in Latin America. I see the example of Itaipu, for example. Are there any other projects or that could be carried out within the sub-region of Latin America? And what are the potentialities of Latin American countries developing their region jointly on the resource, joint sharing and processing of resources, and taking economic advantages of each countries within the continent?
Since I'm going to speak about this afternoon, and it's going to be the entire intervention is going to be on regional and global integration, perhaps it'd be better if we can have views from my colleagues in the panel. I don't know whether Fabian or Juan Mauricio would like to speak. If not, I'll give you a gist, but I don't want to prevent anybody to come to the session that brought me from Washington, D.C. to here, actually. So.
Ce sont deux pays aussi qui sont dans deux processus différents. Le Brésil dans les Mercosur et la Colombie dans la CAN et dans l'Alliance de l'Atlantique. Donc vous pouvez parler de ces deux expériences différentes.
Brazil, along with its three neighbor countries, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, put together back in '86 a first understanding that led all the way to the Mercosur in the early '90s. So we are talking about a process that hasn't occurred overnight, that has as a background several failed attempts to do something similar in terms of trade integration and more ambitiously some economy integration, and there is still undergoing some critical phases now and then because of policy reactions to some difficult conjunctures. So protectionism is always in the middle of, putting this process forward. And still, what I would say is that what has been critical, for me as a political scientist, was surprising. I somehow took part of the first of the earlier steps towards Mercosur that were taken by the first president elected in Argentina after the military withdrew from power, and by then was basically a politicians and government-led process. And to some extent, the elections and the circulation of elites within each country didn't help too much in that regard. It's not that I'm campaigning against democracy, not at all. But certainly that wasn't that didn't provide enough foreseeability to the agreements. So the key player became the companies, and companies that had interest in both markets, and those were the ones leading through the integration of their operations. And here the automotive industry played a leading role. But also as a result of perhaps more solid and robust policy making by Brazil, that had a very clear blueprint for internationalization of their large corporations. Argentina was like the first market for many Brazilian companies to open a branch and to get established and develop business. So this also made very strategic for corporations in Brazil to invest heavily in the consolidation of this integration. And today, what you find as the main advocates of the Mercosur integration process are the companies, with a very influential voice on both governments, but particularly in the Brazilian government. So it started as political, but then the driving force was more business.
Yeah, okay. In the case of Colombia, as many other Latin American countries, there was a explicit strategy of import substitution, but very much disconnected from exports. And that was a big difference, for example, with Asia, I think. And perhaps it's part of the problem why we have an industrialization process, but at the same time, not a large increase in productivity in general. Now, so the challenge is how to integrate successfully in world markets. And in that sense, Colombia is actually behind other countries like Mexico or Chile. And there is something interesting that is related, I would relate with this challenge of having a more sophisticated productive structure. And is that when you see the level of sophistication of exports, the south exports are more sophisticated than the exports going from Colombia to the north, for example. So, for example, our manufacturing exports for Peru or for Ecuador or even for Brazil are far more sophisticated than the export to the European Union or to the United States. And parenthesis, the exports to the United States are the most sophisticated among our exports to developed countries. But definitely there is a very important issue of how to promote South-South trade and integration, which is the next session. And in that, I just finished talking about or saying something that probably will be developed in the afternoon session about the necessity to think of global value chains, global value chains in Latin America. The Asian, how do you say fabrica? The Asian Asian factory. We need a Latin American factory, and we don't have it still. I think.
Merci les participants, merci les publics. On doit finir. L'organisation dit qu'on est hors d'horaire. Il faut continuer après. Dans les autres sessions, on aura l'occasion de discuter des choses. Merci. C'est bon?
C'est bon?